Hey folks, I am on the A2022 Addington Road near West Wickham pumping station. And in this video, I'm going to tell the story of a house called the Larches. I've got some help for the video today. I've got Graham and Kevin. Now, Graham you've heard about in the past. Kevin put the whole story of the Larches before me, and I've done the research and liaised with him, hence the video today. So we're going to take a walk up to the site. I'll tell you the story as we go, and then you never know, we might find something once we get there. Without further ado, let's get on our way. Right, having crossed the busy road, we're going to take the muddy path. This is actually part of the Greenwich Meridian Trail. See my other video over at Botley Hill from a couple of years back. So, as I mentioned, Kevin put me in touch with it. I had no idea about the Larches, so the research began. In the late 19th century, there's no reference at all of this property. But in 1906, there is reference to William Bailey, who lives at the Gamekeeper's cottage called the Larches. And he is the gamekeeper for the Wickham Court Estate that was owned by Sir Henry Leonard. And there are poaching stories in 1906, in 1907. So we know that the house was definitely here in 1906. We know that it was occupied by William Bailey. We know that it was a gamekeeper's cottage, but we don't know much else at this point. In 1910, in the Lloyd George survey, or the Valuation Office survey, it says Gamekeeper's Cottage, Fox Hill Shore, West Wickham, 0.2 of an acre, owned by Sir Henry Leonard. The description, it's in handwriting, not always easy to follow, but it says it's a gable-fronted bungalow, matchboarded throughout, so think wood panels, log cabin, that kind of thing. Generally in fair repair, 4 small bedrooms, parlour and scullery, and that the tenant is gamekeeper to Sir Henry Leonard. It also makes a very telling observation for me, and that's that the cottage is away from the road, making access and therefore letting of the property very difficult. In the 1911 census, the Baileys are living in the property. In 1914, sadly, Catherine Bailey died. And in 1921, the census shows William Bailey, widower, living in the Larches. The area seemed to be known partly as Addington Bottom, but in many references it was the Larches, West Wickham. In 1935, it's the Williams family that lived there. In 1942, William Bailey died, and his address at the time was that of his daughter, which was Sparrow's Den Cottage, Corkscrew Hill, West Wickham. That wonderful listed building that we visited in part 3 of my West Wickham Walk and Talk video. As often is the case with these things, it's hard to find a photograph. And I did some research in the Croydon archives because there was this wonderful collection donated by Molly Moores, and it said photos taken at the Larches. I was excited. I booked an appointment to go and see the collection, and there were photos entitled The Larches, but they were all outdoor photos because Molly Moores was in the Women's Timber Corps, the Lumberjills, an extremely important function in the war where they basically took over the responsibilities of a lumberjack. And there are a wonderful collection of photos in the archives there, but none of a property. So, what about this property? Well, I found a wonderful photo from 1947, an aerial view. It shows quite clearly the property and a sort of fanned out garden. The garden itself seemed to be divided up into vegetable plots and that kind of thing. But the key today is, can we find any evidence? Absolutely beautiful early spring morning as birds fly around in front of me. So we've got quite a bit of a way to go. We're seeing a lot of mud, but it's also starting to soak away in some places. So, and I guess if we come here in about a month's time, it will be a lot more colourful and signs of leaves on the trees and all those lovely springtime things. Really pleasant. Now, I'm following this because it's a path, obviously, but might still need to go off-piste a little to get to the exact location. What I did here was to do a what 3 words coordinates favourite that I saved for the exact middle of the house. Actually looking around here, I mean, it's thick wood. Lovely trees. And there's quite a bit of banking you can't always see, but banks up there. So I'm going to head around here and have a look, see what it says, and look for some evidence. Well, as near as I can get, because the GPS jumps and judders a bit, this is the plot for the Larches. There's a pathway still here, and I'll talk more about that view in a minute. But this is exactly where the house would have stood. The trees are younger here, generally, than some of the others. There's some slightly more mature trees a little bit further back. So it makes that perfectly feasible. Are we going to find anything on the ground in way of evidence? I doubt it. I'm convinced it was a log cabin. I know it had 4 bedrooms and a parlour, etc., but it's going to be very hard to find any evidence. It's not like we can dig here. LiDAR makes a slight impression. Very peaceful. Actually, the land drops away a bit. This is where we came in over there. So the land drops away a little bit there. And the thing that stood out for me on maps and on one or two aerial photographs was that the property sort of pointed towards the fields here. It fanned out somewhat, and that's evident both in the photos and the maps. And you can clearly see in 1947 where this rows of vegetables or whatever were produce were grown, and it would have been a pretty nice view, wouldn't it? That's facing southeast. That land, you can't see too much on this lens, but this is Wickham Court Farm area over here. We're actually in the West Wickham boundary, if you like. The boundary of the two boroughs is sort of along the path we just came up. That's what the gamekeeper that lived in the cottage that was here would have been responsible for, looking after the land, catching poachers, and obviously he was quite successful because we saw there were accounts in the newspapers that he managed to catch some naughty people. I'm channeling my inner Stuart Ainsworth from the Time team here. So we've got quite a high piece of land here. This plot immediately in front of me is where the Larches cottage was. And we've got, again, can't always tell on these, but I'm on a slope. The slope goes down here. And then about where my finger is, that's level, comparatively. So the spot where the property was here. And again, as I just mentioned a bit earlier, we've got the slightly younger trees, shall we say. Distance, dense trees. And the view looking out, this fanning out of the garden was here. And what we're going to do is have a little wander, find the best path we can through this area to the boundary of the field. So we're effectively going to retrace the view from, well, front or rear of the property as it would have been back in the day. What a view they would have had from their back garden. So we've got the Wickham Court is in that side on the left there, and then the farm straight ahead. So all of that land is what William Bailey would have been responsible for as gamekeeper here. So you've got your cottage in the woods, you've got your garden where you're growing crops, and then you've got this at the end of it. So I'm now standing in the garden and I'm looking back towards where the house was, and you're going to have to make your imagination do quite a bit of work here, but I've shown you other evidence of obviously what was here. But one thing we noticed was we got I mean, it's a pathway, but it dips down quite a lot where my shadow is, and then it goes up a bit because it's another cross path, and then dips down again, so possibly some drainage or a culvert or something like that. We may never know the details of this garden. It looked quite flat on the map, but they all do. And until you get here, as we've seen today, the land is quite undulating, and I think this would have made a pretty nice setting to live your life in the woods back in the day. So the question is, what became of the Larches? Well, There was a newspaper story in 1956 where James Archer had a radio set and some property stolen from his property at the Larches. Very brief story in the paper. I examined the electoral roll, and from 1957 onwards there was no reference at all to the property known as the Larches. But it did seem to exist on maps up until the late 60s. But I think the real reason why it was abandoned, demolished, whatever actually happened to it, more about that in a bit, is that the London County Council funded to the tune of £22,000 for the purchase of this land to be retained as green belt. There was a huge demand for housing. This was the early 50s when this correspondence around this first took place, but a huge demand for housing, and pressure was on the local authority to develop this land. Now, of course, we are in a boundary situation here between what would have then been Kent and Surrey, but London County Council stepped in, funded it, and really it's been protected to this day, thankfully. I also think there may have been some practicalities. We've seen even back in 1910, some 4 or 5 years after the house was built, that there was a comment about it being very difficult to be let because the access from the road. I mean, I don't know that it was ever any different, but we could only get here today from a footpath. So you've got this very remote property, would have probably cost a reasonable sum to fully connect to all the required services. I've never seen anything about what they did have in terms of water and gas and electricity, probably very little. But mainly it was the fact that the authorities stepped in, put some money on the table and protected the land. So that was the end of the Larches. But the fact that it was on maps up until the late 60s and maybe early 70s makes me think, did you know the property? So this is my appeal part of the video. Did you live in the area? Did you play in the area? Did you ever discover the Larches, either when it was a functioning home or after it had finished its occupancy? Do you remember it being pulled down? So I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you know any more about this property. I've spoken to quite a few people, quite a few locals, many who grew up in the area, and they have no knowledge of it. But it was here. We've seen the evidence. But we don't really know what happened to it in its final days. That would be a nice little part to know. So if you know, please get in touch. That would be great. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Another one of my little house histories. If you like the video, please hit like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please hit subscribe. And if you'd like to support me for a couple of quid a month, that would be really appreciated. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.